Man, Chicago's it's
hell
a
of
good
a town.
I've never had tavern-style pizza before.
Really? It's clearly the better
Yes,
style.
Adam was hunting for tavern-style pizza last night.
I still haven't had it. I would like to. If someone wants to give it to me, bring it to me. That'd be good. I don't know. I would, tavern style. You know what I'm saying?
It's definitely better than deep dish, in my opinion.
Ooh,
I think that's a popular take.
That is an opinion.
It is my opinion.
It is. I think better. It is better. You guys ready to record today?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. From Chicago, Illinois, I'm Adam Teeter.
And I'm Joanna Sciarrino.
And in Seattle, Washington, I'm Zach Jabal.
And this is the VinePair podcast. Yeah, Joanna, we are in separate hotel rooms, but in the same hotel.
Not the VinePair suite. I'm so disappointed.
Yeah.
No. I feel like that would be inappropriate.
We're making it work.
I meant just just the recording studio at the hotel, of course.
Oh, yeah. We called ahead. We said, book us the same room that, I don't know, who's the famous band from Chicago? Probably a lot. Chicago uses.
I was going to say Sufjan Stevens, but that's just all I can think of is, whatever. I don't even know if he's from Chicago, but
I think he now lives in Brooklyn. So
yeah, whatever.
Yeah. Sufjan Stevens. People are going to be so mad at us. You think that was the most famous Chicago artist? Back off, bro. We're hipsters. So yeah, we got a good show coming up today. But before we hit off on our topic, what have you guys been reading on the site?
I'll go first.
Yes.
I'm going to surprise both of you and not pick a piece with local roots and instead talk about something that I find very interesting, which is the state-by-state guide to whether you can take open bottles of wine home from a restaurant.
Joanna brought that up last night at dinner.
Well, it's so interesting to me on two accounts. One is it is wild, although not surprising really when you think about the patchwork of liquor laws and whatever that we have throughout this country, that there are such differences. But I actually wanted to ask both of you, have you ever been in a situation where you've wanted to take wine home and they're like, okay, let me get the transparent plastic bag that I will officially seal for you? I see that those laws are on the books. Does that actually happen?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Cool.
I can't remember where Naomi and I were, but there was somewhere where we took wine home and they sealed it in the clear plastic bag and we took it. I now cannot remember for the life of me where in the United States we were. But it was younger in our,
Philly?
What was it? I don't know, not Philly. I don't remember where it was, but yes, they sealed it and then we took it back to our hotel room and immediately unsealed the bag and finished the bottle. But it was one of these things where it's we ordered the wine and we drank it too slowly for the meal and then we brought it back, but I cannot remember where we were. Oh, well.
I've never tried to do this.
It has happened once before. We don't go to places like Boston, so it wouldn't be there. Maybe it was LA.
Huh.
Maybe it was somewhere in California. I don't know. I think it might have been somewhere in California.
Interesting. Wow. I just can't picture it. I mean, it was always a thing for me at restaurants in Seattle, explaining to people, no, you can just take the bottle home. It's okay. All you got to do is put the cork in it. It's not a big deal. And, people who travel, sometimes we'd put it in a paper bag for folks who just wanted it for ease of convenience. But I was it does not matter as far as I was aware. And according to the piece, does not matter as long as it's resealed, which we did. We put a cork in it. Thank you.
I thought there would be more restrictions for states not allowing this, but pretty much all of them do.
I mean, I think you have to, right? It's that sort of, even if the states are stricter with their alcohol laws, at the end of the day, this is something you purchased. It's not like it's on loan from the restaurant.
Right.
So if you can't finish that bottle, I think most states would be well, that's still yours. So you have a right to take it with you. But now here's the legal ways in which we're going to allow you to do that. I feel like that's why it's allowed in so many places, And
the argument was always kind of you don't want people I don't know, drinking and driving or whatever.
Yeah,
but is it really better for people to slam a bottle of wine right before they get in the car? Because otherwise they're not going to get it. Better to let people take it home closed and drink it at home than make it so that people feel like they have to finish the bottle. Otherwise it's getting wasted.
Yeah. Why would you do that?
Don't know.
What about you, Joanna?
Yeah, I loved this piece by Brian Alberts about the multicultural roots of the Pacific Northwest hop harvest,
Wow, Pacific Northwest. Yeah,
I know, yeah, it was a very Zach piece, but
I know.
I just thought this piece was amazing because he really digs into the history of the hop harvest and how, and the labor behind it that I think a lot of people probably don't think about today, but just because the demand for hops was growing and growing, and they needed so much labor to meet the demand, and they couldn't, the Native Americans, Chinese immigrants, immigrant labor supported this whole, farming system. And obviously there was a lot of discrimination and racism as part of that, and just kind of, just an overview of that, and then how it relates to what happens today and the labor that goes into it today and the people who are doing it today, and within the context of like the current immigration bullshit that's happening today. So I thought this was a really, really wonderful piece that he wrote for us. So
cool. I didn't read.
Well,
sorry,
that's okay. At least you're feeling better.
I am. But yeah, it was a busy few days, and I gotta get back on the VinePair tip. Sorry. So we got a reader question for today. So, Joanna, you want to read it?
Oh, I thought. Okay, yeah.
Or Zach, I don't care.
Go, Zach.
All right, I will take this one on. Apologies, got to do it off the phone. You're just going to deal with it, folks. So we got a really interesting question from Andrew, which I think is actually fits into some of what we've been talking about. And the question that he asked is, why is bashing overpriced, overmanipulated, lower quality wines and mentioning alternative wines that are under the radar, that are a better value, cleaner, and better tasting, such a bad thing?
Yeah,
I know that the general big food industry is much larger than wine, but you see eat this, not that, and health food influencing all the time. I can see how it's not great for the wine industry to bash lower quality wines and make consumers feel bad about their choices, but the parallelism in the food industry is there, and I don't see it causing such an uproar there. Or maybe I don't pay attention enough to see it. I think a fascinating question. I want to just say this really quickly, which is,
please.
I'll be quick. I think that there is an important thing to note first and foremost, which is that you do see this kind of messaging in wine. I think maybe what Andrew's question is, why do we specifically think it's a bad idea, to clarify? Because obviously there are lots of people out there making content, producing, marketing campaigns around this wine is bad, our wine is good. We had the whole Aveline clean wine thing and others. So it is out there, but I think his question is more for us. Why do we think that's a bad idea?
I mean, I think for me, I'm not saying that bashing other wines doesn't work. Mm-hmm. I guess what I'm saying is it's not a lasting strategy. So, I think we've seen multiple times before that when your strategy is comparing yourself to something else, so when the strategy is, this is what we are not, it's not sustainable in the long term. Mm-hmm. And I think a really good example of that is craft beer. So I think the craft beer strategy in like the 80s and 90s and early 2000s of like us against the big guys, et cetera, like clearly worked, right? People felt like they were sticking it to the man. And at the time when all of that was happening, you also had ABI like buying up a ton of different products, right? And Constellation was buying up a ton of different products. And so like this narrative was really true. But the problem is that at some point that narrative became very tired to a lot of consumers. Like they didn't like how basically every single thing was this like either or, right? At some point, in the same way we talk about politics, like the polarization just becomes tiring. It becomes basically lazy, not creative, right? It's like if all you are is the antithesis of something else, and that's your full marketing strategy, at some point the consumer is like, well, then I don't really know who you actually are besides just the independent, free-thinking brewery compared to ABI. I think also those beers never became unpopular, the beers made by ABI, right? We can see that by the news we talked about a few weeks ago with Michelob Ultra. Like people still liked drinking those beers. And so those beers were still like in the coolers at parties. I think people sort of like, well, there's times and places when I want those kinds of beers. And I also have family members that drink those kinds of beers. And people were just kind of sick of like making each other feel like shit over what they were drinking.
Right.
And you've seen craft beer like really suffer because of that. And I think there was a time when craft beer should have pivoted to other messaging of not this is why they suck and we're great, but like here's why we're awesome and here's why you should, and here's us as a brand and a product, etc. And that's all I'm saying. I just think that there's been a lot made of, oh, well, you guys are apologists for like big beverage because you say these things. I'm like, that's not what I'm doing here. Or I don't think any of us are doing here. I'm not apologizing for big beverage. I'm just saying that from a marketing perspective, that type of narrative is very lazy.
Right.
And it's not sustainable. You can do it if you want, but I think you can see by the very fast decline of natural wine in the zeitgeist that people have found that narrative lazy on the wine side, right? Like this is better because of the way that it's made and screw all these other things. It also got tired very fast. Instead of more creative conversations around wine and these places are made and what these brands stood for, etc. But I get it because lazy marketing is often the easiest marketing, which is why people do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you make a really good point there, which is that I think my interpretation of this is that this is a bad thing because it's not good for wine as a category, right? Like this feels very different than food because it's all different things, right?
Yes.
And you're saying like, well, this wine is, I think it's just wrapped up in a lot of things, right? Like this wine is bad for you and our wine is better for you. It reinforces, first of all, the inaccessibility of wine, right? This idea that like you like a bad wine, your taste is bad, and then people are put off of wine, right? And then yeah, I just think that, like you said, Adam, that instead of that marketing tact of like comparing, it should just be like, our wine is great because of X, Y, and Z. And then consumers should find values that they associate with and identify with in your product versus like understanding your product in the context of another product and it being better than the other one.
And I think, and then obviously I know, Zach, you have thoughts as well, but I think it's a very slippery slope as well because you ultimately can wind up looking like a hypocrite.
Right.
Very easily, very quickly.
Very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So, on the craft beer side, right, it's like, well, what differentiates you guys? Like, why are you, well, we use, high quality hops and we make these full flavored beers and, IPAs and stouts and whatever. And then, for the last 5 to 10 years when all of these craft breweries are now, they're making hard seltzer, they're making lagers, right? They're making these beers that they're making Mexican lagers, right? All of these beers that have been made for decades by the big companies. A consumer is like, wait, but I thought you said this was bad, but now you're doing it,
right.
Or like the winemaker who's like rails against big budget wines, but then is excited when they heard that someone is going to buy wine at the supermarket. It's like, well, like that's still on their like list of things that they're encouraged by. Well, now you sound like a hypocrite, right? Like I thought you didn't like supermarket wine, but now it's okay in certain contexts. Like I think you very easily, when you paint with a broad brush, can get called out, and that is lazy marketing, and consumers will call you out time and time and time and time again. Whereas if you just stood for what you were making and talked about your brand, et cetera, people can figure out why you're different than the other ones. All they have to do is probably come and visit you, try your wines compared to the ones they might find on the grocery store shelf or, Total Wine, et cetera. And like consumers are smart people. They can figure it out for themselves. And so the sort of just like, we're better than this anti-conversation is lazy and causes you to eventually look stupid because you're at some point going to contradict yourself.
Right.
Unless you are just so pure and so up on this narrative that you never ever will. And the second you contradict yourself, someone is going to jump all over it. And that's why it's not worth it.
And I think it comes back to sort of ambition too in this context, where if your goal, like I've met winemakers both domestically and abroad who I think are, borderline dogmatic about what they do in terms of, whether it's winemaking style, being sort of anti-corporate, et cetera. And in some of those cases, they seem very content to basically make wine by themselves for a small number of people. And if that is what they want out of their winemaking life, fantastic. And they probably will never feel like hypocrites because they're never going to look to push their wine into supermarkets or sell their wine to a larger company or even make more than the small amount of wine they currently make. And that's great. And I think the wine industry thankfully has a place for those kinds of people too. And if those are the kind of wines that excite you most, sometimes they are the wines that excite me most. They're out there. They can be found. They're hard to find. Sometimes you got to go to like the middle of nowhere in the Sierra foothills in California, as I have, to go find these wines, but they are there for sure. The thing I wanted to say is not only do I think this kind of marketing is lazy, I actually think it's bad, not even in a like bad for the industry as a whole, but even bad for individual brands in the moment. And the biggest reason for this is, Andrew talks about comparing this kind of marketing to food marketing. And I think the fundamental difference is if you look at the most successful style of this marketing that we've ever seen, which is organic branded things. Organic is an incredibly, it's complicated, but for the consumer in the grocery store aisle, it's very simple to look at a carton of strawberries, and one is not organic and one is organic, and to have a very intuitive and kind of comprehensive understanding as the shopper, what sets these two things apart, what supports the higher price point for the organic. Now, again, there's lots mixed up in there. I understand that I am oversimplifying it, but in the fundamental kind of transactional mindset, it is very clear if I'm going to pay an extra $1.50 for this, carton of strawberries, why am I paying that? Well, because this is organic, and organic is, maybe the consumer thinks it's better for them, better for the planet, whatever, some
strawberries.
Sort of, but carrying that over to a bottle of wine, a packaged product is much harder. And even if you say, for one, there are no or very few organic wine sections anywhere. Like, yes, there are a few grocery chains that focus on organic wine, Whole Foods primarily among them. There are obviously independent stores and things like that where maybe you're going to have only wines that fit into that sort of niche, or at least they're going to be labeled as such. But where the overwhelming majority of wine is purchased sort of, by hand by consumers, the wines that are made, from organic grapes, biodynamically farmed grapes, are usually just on the shelf next to something else that may be grown and picked in a conventional manner. And so it's very hard to differentiate that as a consumer. And that makes it a very difficult thing to market to. Even if we thought it was a good idea, it would be very hard. And I think it's also, as Adam, particularly you've outlined, is a bad idea because you fundamentally are setting yourself up for failure down the road.
Yeah. I also think that like with this kind of narrative, in the same with what craft beer was, you're also hoping, you're assuming that at any given time, the consumer has that very clear choice and they are just choosing one over the other. Right. And that's not often the case. And we can talk about this for a very, till we're blue in the face about the power that unfortunately convenience and grocery and C-store has in terms of their ability to sell to you at a very captive moment for the majority of these consumers. But like, let's be honest, like the wines that we're talking about that this question asks about, those aren't even on the grocery store shelves, right? For the most part, right? There are a bunch of companies that basically control these shelves with, very expensive sales teams, powerful distributors, et cetera. And also a lot of the buyers at these very large chains are lazy. Like they do not want to deal with a small wine brand that, may have an issue keeping up with demand, or may have an issue supplying the amount of stores they need them to supply, or may have an issue getting the wines to a central distribution warehouse. And so they go with the companies that can do that for them on a very consistent basis and make their lives easier, because at the end of the day, wine, even if whoever is the buyer is super passionate about it, and as we've discussed before, often they are, but often they are the person that initially bought toilet paper or soap or whatever in another section of the store, right? They are just trying to have another product on the shelf that the consumer might be looking for when they are there to also buy toilet paper and apples and steak and all those other things, right? When they go out to do their grocery shopping. So for them, like they may not also be trying to have this internal conflict. And like when craft beer became super popular, then yes, a lot of grocery store chains started picking up craft beer. But Whole Foods did lead the way in a lot of those situations. And I think even now with wine, like they're leading the way, as is Trader Joe's, but Trader Joe's is private labeling a lot. But like, so you're asking for a conversation to be had that doesn't actually happen in the day-to-day of just how you would encounter purchasing wine in the first place, right? A better conversation would be actually not anti these wines, but having a conversation with consumers saying, hey, support your local wine shops.
Right.
Support individual wine stores. Go and shop at shops where there's a perspective, et cetera. And again, in a lot of markets, that may not be possible, but in the markets that it is, if the conversation can be, hey, when you want to buy wine, unless it's like, I don't know, you're really trying to buy it for like that risotto you're making at home or whatever, it would be awesome if consumers, even if we get 1 out of 10 of you, took one more additional step and went to the wine shop too when you're out doing your errands and bought from the wine shop, because then those shops are going to be where these wines that everyone is talking about are going to be sold.
Right.
But asking the consumer to make that decision on the grocery store public shelf is just not reality. It's not possible. Those wines aren't there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even if those wines are there, as I said, they're so hard to differentiate unless the consumer walks in with a very clear idea of what they're looking for.
Yeah.
I don't know how often you guys walk the grocery store aisles. Not every time, but a lot of the times when I go shopping, I just, walk down the wine aisle because I'm curious. I'm always curious to see what is being, what's on sale, first of all, because it's always interesting to see kind of who's pushing their product in that way. And then also like, what is being stocked? How is it being marketed? And, like most of the rest of the grocery aisles, like there's no, there's very little information. It's all just kind of, laid out there for you. And unless you have a very specific idea of what you're looking for, you're just going to pick up, again, what's on sale, what bottle looks good, what maybe you faintly recall having heard about one time or tried once before. And so, again, it's much harder to market your product as an alternative to sort of large scale wine if the place you're selling it is in the same spot where those wines are, because there's no one on hand in most grocery stores to make any differentiation to the consumer. And it's just a lot to ask of people to make that distinction in the moment. And it's just an easier distinction to make in, alternative wine shops, even online sometimes. Like it is easier to expect people to be prepared to make those kinds of educated choices in a setting where they're not, as you said, Adam, also trying to get toilet paper and steak and apples and whatever else.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk about the food part of this a little bit, because I think that this marketing, or this messaging rather, is much more permissible in food, because dieting and diet culture is so pervasive in this country.
That's true.
And people understand when someone understand more readily when someone is saying this junk food is bad for you and you should eat this instead. And I don't think that it doesn't compute as easily when it's regarding wine, right? Because
well,
I think
you don't have to drink wine. You do have.
You
to
don't
eat.
have to drink wine, exactly. And so you are making a choice to drink wine, period, or not. So like the idea of like picking a different wine over one wine, I think just doesn't quite match up with saying like you're eating a bag of chips. Here's what you should be eating instead. Like people are just so much more receptive to that messaging because of diet culture, I think, in this country, in the world,
I mean, I think the other thing too, and this is, look, some people are going to disagree with this point, but I do think, at least for a subset of consumers, this is true, is that the beer argument also was, we are making full flavored beer. They are selling you piss, basically, right? They're selling you water.
Yeah.
You're paying for water. And if you want to drink water, that's fine, but that's what their beers are. It was a very clear moment in time when there was a consumer set that was looking for full flavor and did not want to just drink Bud Light, High Life, Natty, Bud Heavy, all that kind of stuff, right? The difference in wine, I think, is that a lot of the brands at the supermarket are delivering the flavor the consumer is looking for.
Right.
It might have a lot more sugar than we want to have in it.
Yeah.
It might not be made in the ways that a lot of us think are really great for the environment. But on the flavor side, right, there's a reason that some of these brands are so popular.
Right.
Because they are delivering flavor. I mean, there's a brand, again, that like continues to push the sugar up in its wine. Why? Because the consumer doesn't seem to mind. Like, they're happy to drink. I mean, a lot of consumers are very happy to drink Pinot Noirs that actually taste like Syrah.
Right.
Right? Or Merlot, like, or Zinfandel. Like, that's kind of what the consumer says they want in a lot of different regards. So like, you're now also trying to get them, the wine conversation is also trying to get them to, you're trying to say, hey, drink this because I know it's better, but it actually tastes the way the grape should taste. And the consumer thinks, well, maybe I don't like that. Maybe I've also been, taught that Pinot Noir does taste like Merlot.
Right.
When made by some of these brands. And I don't like Pinot Noir when it actually tastes like Pinot Noir.
Right.
So that's a very hard thing to compete against. And then the other thing I wanted to say is with the grocery store aisle, I do think the one thing we do have to remember, though, is that at this point in time, people are buying wine. They're buying wine. It's a good thing. And there are some great wines on the grocery store aisle sold by some of these companies. Also, like, that's another way to help get them in, is starting to point out what those wines are. Hey, if you're at Publix, here are the wines you should look for. That helps win them to move from there to the local wine shop to buy other wines that are in that style. I think that's also like a much better thing. I think when I see that done successfully in food, like, that often works, right? So it's like when people say, I don't know, with pasta, look for bronze die cut, right? That's a very easy thing. And like, people start looking for it, and then they see it at other like independent grocers, like, oh, this must mean the pasta is better. I don't know. So, hey, we think that here are 3 or 4 wine brands. We do this. I mean, if you look at our rankings of the best Merlots of the year, the best Cabernets, whatever, there are always wines on there that you can find on the grocery store. And that's not because we're paid to do that or because we're in the pocket of big wine, like some people might want to claim, et cetera. It's because Keith is trying to point people to those wines, if this is where they buy wine, as a, hey, like, if you're going to buy a Cabernet in the grocery store, this is the best Cabernet. Right. This is the Cabernet to buy. This is one that tastes somewhat in line with the rest of the bottles made by independent producers on this list. And hopefully you buying that wine will ultimately benefit the other producers of Cabernet on this list, because you're going to taste wine that is more in the universe of the way this grape should taste. And if you fall in love with this wine, hopefully you'll explore more of this grape.
Right.
Like, that is more of what you could do as a marketer. And there are people in other food influencing and drink influencing, et cetera, that do that, right? When you go to Costco, look for like whatever that hopefully expand someone's palate and expand the things they would look for. But just this, other than that, I don't think works, and I think it's just incredibly lazy.
And I think the last piece of it too, and Joanna kind of hinted at this, is like, it's also just disingenuous and kind of hard to market wine or any alcohol purely through sort of health claims. Like, that is just, we've talked about a lot on the pod. Wine is not like inherently healthy. And I think we sort of talked about how, wine has had a really hard time moving on from the idea that it is. And while I think we all think that wine can absolutely be part of a healthy lifestyle, there are perhaps some, there are definitely benefits of a variety of kind from drinking wine, but it's not like saying this food that we are putting out there is a healthier alternative to something you already like, in a way that I think obviously it's been abused in food, but it is also a thing that I think can legitimately be sort of scientifically claimed in some of these cases. And I think it's just much harder to make those claims in wine. And it's also much harder because, again, when you're comparing, produce or something like that, where it's so stark what the item you're buying is to a packaged product like wine, not a lot of people in the grocery store aisle think about the grapes that go into the bottle of wine beyond maybe the variety. And that just makes it not only, I think it's also not, it's like I said, you can't market to the health side of it, but it also just makes marketing around the, viticulture and all those things much more challenging, because it's not in people's faces the way, the organic versus, conventional farmed produce thing is just right in your face at the grocery store in a way that, you make a decision whether it matters to you or not, but you are not unaware of the distinction there.
Yep. I think those are all great points. I mean, so look, if this is how you want to market, fine, do it. But I think what we've pointed out throughout this podcast is that I think there's the reason that we are so anti it on the pod is because there are more risks than benefits in the long run. I think there are brands that can have very quick success with it, but the risks in the long run are very great. I think the hypocrite risk is huge. I think that especially younger generations are very fast to call bullshit and call people out when they think they have been hypocritical or disingenuous. And there's a lot of risk to doing that. And the other thing I will say, the one last thing, is it is human nature to compare yourself. That is what we do when we're dating, et cetera. Like we're herd animals. It's like, I want to compare myself to these other men in the pack to determine if I would be a better mate, all those things, right? But I'll never forget when we were first starting VinePair, and I would be at events, et cetera, and people had not heard of VinePair before, and sort of my initial gut would be, well, we are the X, Y, or Z that's better than the other places, right? Like we're the new whatever. And I remember after one event, Naomi pulled me aside and she said, I get why you've done that, right? This was 2014, right? We were just starting. And she's like, but can I give you like a piece of feedback? And I was like, sure, even though it's very hard to hear feedback from your partner, as we all know, right? And we get very defensive of that feedback. And she said, I think when you do that, it makes you sound less confident and it makes you sound very insecure. And she's like, you're starting something that is really great and really important and you believe in it and Josh believes in it. Don't compare yourself to all these other people in the space. Because I think if you don't, you'll actually come across as more confident and more self-assured of what you're doing than doing the latter. And she was totally right. And I think that is very true in this way as well. If you want to do that, that's fine, but you come across as a deeply, deeply insecure person. When you attack other people and you compare yourself and the wines you make and why you think they are better than what else is out there, you come across as very small.
Right.
And people ultimately don't want to support people that are small and sound like they are whining and complaining. That's just the reality. So that's what I will leave you all with as my piece of advice as an entrepreneur. And I'll talk to you both on Monday.
Have a nice weekend.
Sounds great.
Thanks so much for listening to the VinePair podcast, the flagship podcast of the VinePair Podcast Network. If you love this podcast, please leave us a rating or review wherever it is that you are currently listening to it on. It really helps other people discover the show. Also, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your colleagues. Basically, tell anyone about the VinePair podcast. It's always very appreciated, especially by Joanna. The podcast is hosted by myself, Adam Teeter, our editor-in-chief, Joanna Sciarrino, and Zach Jabal, sommelier, former sommelier from Seattle, Washington, as we all know. It is edited by Darby Seaside. Theme music also by Darby Seaside. Art for the podcast by Daniel Grinberg. VinePair was co-founded by myself and Josh Malin. Thanks so much again for listening, and we will see you again the next time you listen to an episode. If you made it all the way through these credits, I again consider you a super fan.